Hi, my name is Yahav, and I was born and raised as an Israeli and as a Zionist. During the past few years, I've gone through a process of questioning the narrative I grew up with regarding this land we live in and the people living on it. This podcast is about voices of the disillusioned. Each episode is a one-on-one heartfelt conversation with an activist who supports the Palestinian struggle, telling the story of the journey that led them to see through what they were taught. Each of these people has their own unique path that I believe anyone can learn from, whether you're a Palestinian or a Jew living here or abroad, or just anyone who feels strongly about this subject. I hope you learn as much as I learn from them about how to build a better future for all people between the river and the sea. Aharon grew up in a settlement in the West Bank and has come a long way since. Today, he lives in Tel Aviv, writes and teaches about crypto-currencies and blockchain technologies as a means for change, and is currently completing his master's degree in public policy at Tel Aviv University. Following the 2011 Israeli social justice protests, Aharon co-founded several cooperatives and in the past few years has been participating in protective presence activity in the West Bank to aid Palestinian shepherds and farmers. Hi, Aharon.
Hi, Yahav.
How's it going?
Pretty well, I think, personally. Considering the situation, the horrifying things that are happening around us, I can appreciate my own privilege and the fact that for now, I still safe and can keep some kind of a routine inside of the madness.
Yeah, same here. So I'm going to go back. I'd like you to tell me about your family. Where does your family come from?
My family. My father came from the United States. He came from Cleveland, Ohio. My mother born in Israel. She was born in Beersheba and grew up in Jerusalem. Her father also born in Israel, in Tel Aviv, actually. Her mother, my grandmother, she escaped from the Nazis in the 30s, from Berlin to Britain and then to Israel. Back to my father's side, while my father was born in the United States, his father was born in Jerusalem. My grandfather was, I think, sixth generation in Jerusalem. He was part of the Yishuv Yashan, the old Jewish community in Jerusalem, and he wrote that he was not a Zionist. He did not identify with Zionism when he was young. He was more in the side of the religious anti-Zionism that was the majority of Judaism at the time. He was even identified himself as part of the Neturei Karta communities that until now known for their strong objection to the Zionism movement. But then, as he himself wrote, he met Rabbi Kook Sr., Rav Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Kook.
The father,
yes. About, I think, a little bit more than 100 years ago. And he changed his mind. He found this movement much more appealing and aligning with his religious viewpoint after he became one of the students of Rabbi Kook.
And tell me a little bit about what this movement was about that was more appealing to him.
Zionism and Orthodox Judaism, the religious community, were very far from each other at the beginning of Zionism, at the beginning of the end of the 19th century. Zionism is a secular movement. It's even anti-religious movement in its basic. Rabbi Kook was the one that tried to create the connection, to create one coherent viewpoint, ideology of both Zionism and Orthodox Judaism, religious point of view. And unlike other movements, they did not found it as one ideology. They consider themselves as religious, but they knew that Zionism, they accept the Zionism as a secular movement. Rabbi Kook brought the religious and even more of the mysticism of Judaism into the Zionism. He read the historical events that were happening at his time as a mysticism, as a mystican. He saw it as an expression of the will of God through those people that rebel against God, through those secular Jewish people that left their families and stopped practicing the laws of Judaism. He saw them as the ones that will lead the Israel nation toward redemption, toward the Messiah, and rebuilding the idea of the chosen people on their own land, with their own sovereignty, practicing all aspects of Judaism as a nation.
So just a little bit of background for those who don't know, the beginning of the Zionist movement of waves of immigration to this land started with young Jewish people from Eastern Europe who decided to leave behind their families and leave behind their Judaism as well, and come make the Zionist project come true. And because these people were actually ideologically and religiously far away from observant Jews at the time, what you're saying is Rabbi Kook saw them as like, well, even though they're not believers, and they decided to abandon religion and Judaism and the tradition, they are taking part in bringing the Messiah. So we need to cooperate with them and be part of their movement.
Yeah, he admired them. He admired the pioneers of Zionism. And he saw them as holy people, even though they were sinner in their own eyes. Rabbi Kook saw them as holy people that bring the will of God into existence.
This really is a very mystical point of view. Like, I see people who are sinners bringing the will of God into manifestation, and this is how I base my whole ideology and call in followers to become religious Zionism that we know today.
Yeah, but it is very important to note that at the time you could not consider it as a movement. It was such a small part of the population, neglected even maybe a few tens of people even knew about, understand this ideology. My great-grandfather, when he became a student of Rabbi Kook, he was one of very few people that follow him, that consider him as someone that we should learn from. Most of Jewish people were religious and anti-Zionism, or even didn't knew about Zionism, didn't care about Zionism. And a few were secular Zionists. And there was also a small part of people that practice Judaism and support Zionism as a practical solution to the suffering of the Jewish people, but not as a way to bring the Messiah back. Mm-hmm. Rabbi Kook was the one that saw it differently. And at the time, not a lot of people were willing to listen to him, and he was condemned by both sides. So my great-grandfather was part of a very small minority in the Jewish population at the time, in Israel, Palestine, and in all of the Jewish communities, all Jewish population in the world even.
Mm-hmm. And so once he started following Rabbi Kook and became a Zionist, still keeping his religious practices and still very believing and practicing Jew, he then found himself in the U.S.
He immigrated first to Britain and then to the U.S. because it was very hard to make a living in Jerusalem at the time. Jerusalem was very, very poor city. It's the end of the Ottoman Empire. He didn't find himself in one of the new Zionist settlements. So for looking for a job as a scholar, as a rabbi, my great-grandfather was a rabbi himself. He was a teacher in religious schools in Jerusalem. So first he became a rabbi in Britain, and then he offered a job as the community chief rabbi of Cleveland, Ohio, where he eventually settled down, and where my grandfather immigrated with him when he was a small boy, where he grew up and met my grandmother. And in Cleveland, Ohio is where my father was born.
And then your father found his way here as well.
Actually, my father was the last of his family to come to Israel. The first one was his older sister. Yeah, what happened to my father's family is really a good representation of what's happened to a lot of American Jewish communities and people at the time. They were supportive of the Zionist movement and the state of Israel, but supportive from afar. I think most of them still held some skeptical point of view about the potential of the Zionist project and the state of Israel until 1967. 1967 was a very important point in time where the opinion and the ways that a lot of Jewish people look at Israel has changed.
Why is that?
Well, the war and the great victory, people look at it as an act of God. Before the war, Israel was in a real danger of existential threat. A real danger that the Arab armies will destroy it and the state of Israel and the Zionist project will come to an end less than 20 years before the establishment of the state.
What's interesting is that up until today, this is still the narrative. Even though it's not true anymore, many Israelis, actually I think most Israelis, are raised to believe that this is the main existential threat. It's like all these Arab armies around us, surrounding us. You know, we're surrounded by enemies and we have to be strong because we're, the David and Goliath like ethos.
Yeah, and also they want to kill us no matter what because they're anti-Semitic. It's not about the context. There is nothing we can do about it. They will want to kill us anyway. We only have to build, the iron wall and all of that. Yeah, but at the time, I think that was a very genuine sentiment in the period before 1967 war. And then when it all became the complete other way around, that the small IDF was able to defeat the 3 or 4 or 5 armies, it depends how you count them, and to almost, I think, more than triple the size of the territory that is under the control of the Israeli army, considered to be a miracle. People didn't look at it as another victory in another war. It was an act of God, a miracle to show us that we are on the right direction, that Zionism is the expression of the will of God, and God will do things beyond the natural order of things in order to show us that we are on the right path toward redemption, and we will rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and everything will go back to where it should have been over the last 2,000 years. I think this is a way of thinking that is not unique only to religious people. A lot of people became closer to religion, to the Jewish religion after the 67 war, even if they didn't start practicing themselves.
Also, the symbol of this victory of that war was the picture, the very iconic picture of 3 soldiers conquering the Western Wall in Jerusalem, which had become the symbol of the Jewish people.
The crying parachuters.
Yeah, and it's like there was this effort also to paint it as a mystical and a religious victory and not only a military victory. Like we conquered Jerusalem, like the heart of the Jewish religion. It was, even though the military had conquered, like you said, 3 times as much as the size of the state up until then, the real importance was Jerusalem.
And the West Bank, the place where most of the Bible stories has happened. So going back to Hebron and Shechem and all of those places, Judah and Samaria, it was a miracle, considered to be a miracle for a lot of people. And also, it was the first time that student of the yeshiva of Rabbi Kook, now was managed by his son, Rabbi Kook Jr., you can say. They had taken an active part in conquering Jerusalem, in fighting against the Arabs.
The students of the Rabbi Kook, the son.
And it considered to be some kind of a prophecy of Rabbi Cook, the son. A few weeks before the war, he spoke to the students. He made a speech. And in his speech, a few weeks before the war, he was crying, "Where is our Hebron? We won't forget it. Where is our Shem? We won't forget it." He was crying for those pieces of land that was left outside of the sovereignty of the state of Israel after 48 and before the war of 67. So,
even though they have like very strong importance in the Jewish religion.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So he was like mourning that.
Exactly.
And little did he know, a few weeks later, it was going to be conquered.
And the student that sat and listened to him and heard him crying for Hebron and Shechem, a few weeks later found himself wearing army uniform, holding guns, and entering into these places that were the Jews could not enter for almost 20 years. So people consider it as a prophecy that came to be. And I think about it, maybe it's weird to go for such a metaphor, but do you remember the opening scene or the intro of the Simpson family? There is when Maggie, the baby, is sitting and it looks like she's driving the car, and then the frame is going wider and you see that it is actually her mother driving the car. I think this is something similar, like when people... they move the wheel in some direction and the car really moves this direction, or they have some ideas about reality and then history goes exactly to the same direction. So they believe they have control. So they understand what God is planning, because if God was able to rescue us from annihilation by the Arabs and gave us back our land, and we knew that this is what should happen, so now we understand the plan of God, and now we can foresee what will happen next. And so
we must be in control.
Exactly. We must be in control. And I think most of religious Zionism people really believe that they acting exactly according to the will of God, and they know what is the God plan, and everyone that is saying to them, you should consider other factor, is going against God. And this is why they are so stubborn, and some of them even violent, to accomplish their goals.
I just want to play devil's advocate a little bit, because the people that actually carried out the Nakba and the war that established the state of Israel were actually the secular Zionists, the Ben Gurion people. Those people were not the religious Zionists that thought, this is what God wants. They were doing it from a little bit of a different narrative than this is going to bring the Messiah. So you're talking about like 20 years later, and everything you're saying is very true and very historically accurate. But I also want to remind you and the listeners that there were also very aggressive, large-scale operations that brought to the displacement of almost 1 million Palestinians, and that was carried out not by those people who are Messianic. So we also have to, I guess, I would say, quote unquote, give credit to the in a very ironic way, but kind of give credit to the secular Zionists and almost even atheist Zionists that had a very, very influential part in creating a situation of the exclusive sovereignty of Jews over this land.
Zionism is based on a lot of internal contradictions. And the fact that it is secular did not prevent the people that execute this ideology to act with some kind of religious urge or religious motivation. The best phrase to explain it or to showcase it is, there is no God, but God promised us this land.
Yeah. So you're saying even the, atheist secular Zionists that were part of the establishment of the state and carried out the Nakba, they too had some kind of religious urge, but it wasn't as outspoken, wasn't as articulated as the religious Zionism of 1967. That's what you're saying. Yeah. Or it wasn't led by rabbis necessarily.
It led against rabbis' wills and says, But Ben Gurion admired the Bible. He studied the Bible. He teach the Bible. You can see it in a lot of Zionist leaders' text. They were very attached to Judaism, and they also wanted, to go back to biblical times, to ignore what happened to Judaism between the destruction of the Second Temple until the modern age.
Yeah, that's also part of the Zionist project, is to kind of like erase the Jewish history and the Jewish presence on this land between the times of the Bible, thousands of years ago, and the modern age. So that it looks like we're just coming back and there was this void in between.
Yeah,
and a lot
was evacuated, was empty all this time, and people, this is part of it.
Yeah, when in fact there were Jewish communities living here all along, like your great-grandfather's family, for instance.
My great-grandfather family came to Jerusalem 1770, I think, something like this, the end of the 18th century. My family came to Jerusalem a few hundred years ago.
Yeah, what I'm saying is what I'm saying all along, I'm saying there was Jewish presence here before, between the Bible times and the Zionist project and the Zionist ideology. There were other things happening and other history being lived that they're just ignoring because it's very comfortable to ignore it and just say, well, we need to go back to Hebron and Shem and Yericho and all these places and Bethlehem because they're part of the Bible. They were in the Bible, so we need to...
And it's ours. And we don't need to prove that it is ours because it's written in the Bible here. The celebration of Hebron is the time of the year when in the synagogue you read in the Bible that Abraham bought the tomb of the patriarchs. The place where he buried his wife and later on was buried himself and his son as well. Our ancestors' graveyard was bought, and the story of this deal is written in the Genesis book. And once a year, people are in the synagogues, this story is being told. And at the time that it's being told, this is the time that a lot of people come to celebrate it in Hebron and Kiryat Arba. So the fact that it's written in the Bible, for them, it makes sense that we don't need to prove that it is ours.
So let's go back to how your father got here.
Yeah. So after 1967, my aunt, older sister of my father, came to visit Israel. And she went to Hebron. At the time, it was the beginning of the settlement in Hebron. The settlers that were students of the yeshiva of the Rav Kook stayed at the time at the military base and waiting for the approval and started building. You can consider it one of the first settlements in the West Bank. So she went there and she met some student from the yeshiva of the Rav Kook. And they say that my great-grandfather called Rav Tzvi Yehuda, the Rabbi Kook Jr., and asked him about the student. And he got his approval. He's worthy for his granddaughter.
He's kosher.
He's kosher. And she brought back home to Cleveland, Ohio, to her parents, to my grandparents. She wrote, "Now I'm home," from Hebron. And my grandmother didn't like it. What does it mean? Home is where we are. Home is where you grew up. But my grandfather understood. So a few years later, the rest of the family joined them. It was the beginning of the 70s. A lot of American Jews immigrated to Israel because of the 6 Days War, because of those new opportunities and the feelings that the state of Israel is here to stay.
The euphoria, the post-war euphoria that we know so well from our history lessons in school.
Yeah, it's part of it. Yeah. The euphoria of after the 67 war was all around Israeli sentiment, but for American Jews, it was their opportunity to take an active part for the first time in this project. Mm-hmm. So it began with a young woman, 20 years old, something like this. And then the rest of the family joined her. I'm talking about my aunt. And then my father came. He joined his parents in Jerusalem. There in Jerusalem, he met my mother. And when I was about 6 months old, they moved to Kiryat Arba, which is a settlement right near Hebron, where my aunt was already living there, and also my mother cousin. So when they were looking for a place to buy a home, to buy a house, they found very cheap apartment with a very strong community, a very supportive community, with a lot of optimistic viewpoint to the future. It was a beginning of a lot of things.
And then later on, they also went to form a new outpost in the South Hebron Hills, right? Like it wasn't enough to just live in an established settlement right outside Hebron. They wanted to be part of the project, of the ideological, move.
Yes, and I joined them. I was 5 years old with my sister. She was 2 years old or 3 years old. And we drove to kind of nowhere near the desert in the south side of the Hebron mountain. And they gave us some trees to plant and some
Who's
shovels. The grown-up, I don't know. I just have a vague...
when you say they, you mean like your parents gave you and your sister? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we plant the trees. And then while we were planting the trees, the first houses arrived on trucks. And it was very efficient and very quick. And I think it's a few weeks before all the infrastructure was connected to electricity, to sewage, to water, everything that they needed. And the same has happened in a lot of places in the West Bank at the time. And this place exists still today. It's called Ma'ale Hever. My family, we did not stay there for many reasons, not political ones. And my family decided to go back to Kiryat Arba.
What was it like growing up right on the edge of Kiryat Arba, right up against the fence, separating you from basically Hebron, from Palestinian Hebron?
As a child, where you are looks like normal because you don't know anything else. It took me a lot of time to understand that a lot of my childhood experience were not normal and were not right. But at the time, this is how I saw the world.
What does the world look like there?
There is us, that we belong to the place. This is our home. Kiryat Arba, Hebron, we have the right to be there. And we have the soldier to protect us. And someday I will be a soldier to be part of this effort. And there are them, the Arabs. Nobody calls them Palestinian. Nobody considers them as people that have the right for self-determination. And they were part of the view, part of the landscape, you can say, at best, but mostly danger. Mostly they are the enemy, they want to kill us. We always have to be vigilant and to protect ourselves. But also to make things even more complicated, they were also service providers. Before the first Intifada, place to fix your car was the Arabs' garage in Hebron, a place to buy vegetables in Hebron market.
So how did that dissonance come together? Because they're a threat, but they're also giving you the services and they're also selling you the vegetables. So how do you...
So the message is don't turn your back to them.
Because then they'll stab you in the back?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And Hebron is also the place where the massacre of 1929 happened. This is one of the traumatic events of the early Zionist movement. And the narrative is that Arab killed their Jewish neighbors with some kind of animal behavior without no logic. Only in the last few years ago, when I read the book of Hillel Cohen, Tarpat, I realized that this narrative is so far from reality. The Arabs that lived in Hebron protected the Jewish people.
Some of them hid them in their houses.
And in a great danger they took upon themselves to do that. And the murderers, most of them came from outside. Well, it's always more complicated than the narrative says.
Which is what the book actually explains. I really recommend, if you read Hebrew, to read this book by Professor Hillel Cohen, who's the head of the Middle East Studies in the Hebrew University, right?
You know better than I am.
Yeah, I'm actually reading that book right now. It's very interesting. It really shows that reality and history are much more complicated than this narrative that we were raised on.
But the narrative is that you cannot trust Arabs. You cannot trust them. The Israeli narrative, not all of Israelis believe this, but it is kind of a baseline for Zionism, is that Arabs has some kind of animal instinct to kill. And now this narrative, this way of thinking, this racist way of thinking is being used for justifying the horrifying things that Israel and the IDF is doing in Gaza. But even before that, all the occupation, all the
dehumanization is based on that.
Yeah.
And the 1929 massacre in Hebron very much serves this narrative because it basically disqualifies the argument about the Nakba, because it says this aggression towards Jews happened decades before the Nakba, which proves that it's not that like we started it all by displacing 700,000 Palestinians from their homes and never letting them back. Like it goes farther down the line.
And then when you start studying history, you realize that displacing the Palestinians has began even before the
Nakba as well, yeah. And before 1929 as well.
Yeah, so it's always more complicated than most people think. So, but for me, as a child, I have no idea about the things. I just know that when I go outside of the settlement, I'm in danger.
You lived right on the fence, on the edge.
My parents' home is still there. There is a road, and then the valley is where the Palestinians' houses are. I don't know, 200 meters from my parents' home, something like this. But I had never communicated with any of them, those people. There is a fence, there is army, there is a complete separation.
And this is in the 80s?
Yes.
Your house actually led to this gate that leads to a road that leads to the Ibrahimi Mosque, the Tomb of the Patriarchs, which is a very important site for Muslims and Jews. Tell me a little bit about walking this route.
This route I've been walking on as a teenager every Shabbat, every Saturday, going to pray in Me'arat HaMachpelah, in the Ibrahim Mosque, in the Tomb of Patriarch. It is a very special place. It's a very unique place. It's an ancient building. I think it's from Herod's time, 1800 years old, something like this. That is a synagogue and a mosque on the same place. And until 1994, the mosque and the synagogue there was no separation. There was some rooms for the mosque, some room from the synagogue, but you can move from one side to the other all the time.
And there was free movement for the Palestinians as well?
I don't know exactly what were the rules for the Palestinian, but I do remember us standing in the prayer of Shabbat Eve on Friday night and singing and reading the Torah, and then a group of soldiers are coming, surrounding the Muslim prayer leader and walking through the Jewish prayer. A Muslim, a Palestinian, surrounded by soldiers going to this other side of the building so he can call for the prayer.
So the soldiers basically were escorting him?
Yes.
So that you guys wouldn't harm him?
But it was kind of a routine. It was normal, this whole unnormal situation.
And what happened in 1994 that changed that?
In 1994, a friend of my father, a very well-known character in Kiryat Arba, in the settlement, the doctor of the community. It was Purim. It was one of the holidays of the Jewish tradition. And he took his gun that he owned, that he got from the army as part of being a settler. He took a huge amount of ammunition and he went to the mosque of the Tomb of the Patriarch and entered exactly at the time of the morning prayer of the Muslims. While they were bending ahead as part of the ceremony, he started shooting them and he murdered 29 Palestinians in their prayer. And one of the most horrifying terror attack that Jews acted toward Palestinians.
And he was also killed himself on the spot.
Yeah, eventually the Palestinian there stopped him by by killing him. The army came only later. And this was, we were talking about 1994. It is the time of the Oslo agreements starting to be implemented in the West Bank. It's under the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. It was before he was murdered. And there were some kind of demands from the left wing of Israel to evacuate the Jewish settlement in Hebron. Also, for the context, it's important to know that Kiryat Arba is like some kind of a classic settlement because it is separated from the Palestinian population. It is very close to, but it's still its own neighborhood. In Hebron, there are a few neighborhoods that are inside the Palestinian population of Jewish settlement.
Yeah.
And there was a demand to evacuate this settlement, and the government did not listen for this demand. But one of the results of the Goldstein massacre was a complete separation between the Muslim side of the building and the Jewish side, the mosque and the synagogue, different entrance, and a complete separation. There is no movement between one side to the other.
And a lot of restrictions on the Palestinian side as well.
Yes.
There weren't before.
There are 10 days a year that the building is all Muslim or all Jewish. But beside that, it's complete separation. And Baruch Goldstein he was an American as well. He was one of the students of Rabbi Kahana. Some of Rabbi Kahana students came from the United States to Kiryat Arba, to Hebron.
Straight.
Yes. My father was not part of this movement.
But he was friends with these people because they were also American immigrants.
Yes, he was looking for people to talk English with.
Mm-hmm. A few months before the massacre that Baruch Goldstein carried out, he was a guest in your bar mitzvah.
Yeah, he was a friend of my family.
Mm-hmm.
More than that, he's a relative right now. His son is married to my cousin.
Oh, wow.
It's also important to remind that during the years before that, there was a lot of terror attacks against settlers from Palestinians, of the Palestinian side. And Baruch Goldstein, as the doctor of the area, he was the first responder. And friends of him died in his hands, literally. So you can, there is the kind of this post-traumatic phenomena. I have no doubt that it also impacted what he did. Not that it's justifying it, but for context, it's important to know that while there were talks about peace and agreements, and Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin are shaking hands, and in the center of Israel, people are celebrating, and that they won't need any army soon or something like this. In the settlement, people were murdered. No need for justification, just for context. And another friend of my father, that's really a story of my childhood that I still not sure exactly how to think about it. So when I was a child, another friend of my father was turned in to United States authorities. And only years later, I learned that the Americans blame him for sending a bomb to Yasser Arafat's office, and a secretary of the office opened the envelope, and she was killed. And he was also one of the followers of Rabbi Kahana, and he came to Israel and he settled in Kiryat Arba. And years later, the Americans demand the Israeli government to turn him in for him to be sentenced for murder in the United States.
Wow. How does your father feel about these friends? How does one handle this situation where his friends...
I want to say first that my father is not a violent man. He may be part of a violent ideology, but as a person, he will treat every person respectfully. But he was surrounded by lunatics, really. And he had a lot of excuses because a lot of people, many settlers until today said that what Goldstein did, he prevented an attack against the Jews. So
there's this theory that claims that he had some kind of inside information, and that he knew that people that were in that mosque praying were probably planning an attack, and he went to prevent it by massacring them.
Because the army won't do it, because the army wants to work with the government to...
Which is, the government is trying to sign the peace process.
And it was left-wing government, yes, all of it. Yeah.
And people believe this.
Yeah,
like many of the settlers,
yes,
he believes this.
He will give you proof. If you talk to him about it, he will give you proof that this is what happened.
So he's like saying he did something heroic by like he... in hindsight, saved Jews? Is that like the claim?
This is the claim. I'm not sure about the heroic side of it, because I don't think that my father really admired Baruch Goldstein for what he did. You know, the Minister of National Defense right now, he is known to be...
Ben-Gvir, who also grew up in Kiryat Arba.
Yeah, he's a few years older than me. I didn't know him at the time. He said that he admired Goldstein. My father, he didn't admire Goldstein. He was a friend of him. I don't know how much they talk politics between them. It was like someone to have a Shabbat dinner with. So I think it's more like to solve this dissonance of non-violent men that his friends are so doing such horrible things, that by explaining it as a defense action, this is how he can live with it, I think.
This is how he can like come to terms with the situation that he's living. Yeah. So you're saying it's like a coping mechanism that's more like
this is how I interpreted it, because again, my father didn't take any active part in violence against Palestinians. Himself, again, all my family and me myself, we have a responsibility for what's happening, for the circumstance and for the wider picture. But directly, he never hurt any man, any person, any woman, any child.
And you?
Yes, I'm very embarrassed to confess it, but the truth is that I did harm. I never harm people, but I did create damage to property. I took part in revenge actions after terror attacks against our neighbors in Kiryat Arba. I took part in throwing stones at cars, at houses of Palestinian houses. I did take part in demonstrations to prevent the Palestinian to access some territories. As a child, I did things that I deeply regret.
What age was this?
Teenager, 14, 15, 16. I think even younger. My only excuse is that I was really young. I have no idea what's happening around me. I have very simplistic viewpoint on the world. And the surprising thing is that people that grew up with me and they are grown up now still have the same childish perspective about the situation.
So you're saying like you grew out of that mindset and they are somehow still there?
Yeah, they accept the simplistic narrative as is without questioning it. And in other circumstances, I could be in the same place as well.
You're talking about your years as a teenager. Other than what you just told me, there was a lot of background. You were also taking part in protests against the Oslo Accords. You were also studying in a yeshiva, a boarding school in a settlement not far away. Tell me about that.
It was a settlement where our school was, but it could be very nuanced, but it's much less extreme settlement. I've been considered by my fellow students as the extremist, the right-wing.
Fanatic settler.
Yes.
Which is kind of ironic because they're all settlers as well.
Some of them came from Jerusalem and other places, but the yeshiva itself is on a settlement, yeah.
But it's also like people in Tel Aviv saying like you were a settler, and people in Tel Aviv are also settlers, so...
Yeah, so
it always goes like.
and we are talking about the time of, as you said, Oslo Accord being implemented, and left-wing governments trying to lead to, or at least saying that they are moving forward to state solution and talking about evacuating settlement. And there was a very strong protest movement against it, very strong, very loud. And it eventually became violence as well. One of the memorable demonstration was in Jerusalem. And I remember the thrill of standing as a child, as a teenager. I didn't went to sports game. I didn't went for football games. I didn't have this, or even to a music concert. I didn't have this experience of standing with a lot of people with the same aim and to feel part of a few tens of thousands of people looking on the same thing. But I did get it in the demonstration. And standing there in Kikar Tzion, in the center of Jerusalem, and shouting together, Rabin is a traitor. Rabin is a murderer, and some of them even shouting death to Rabin, while the head of the opposition is standing in front of us, Bibi Netanyahu, and encouraging the crowd, and people are burning picture of Rabin and shouting, and it was powerful.
It's just crazy that you're talking about the early 90s and this is 2024 and Netanyahu is still leading the government.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Netanyahu is only part of the problem. I'm not claiming that he's like the whole deal, but 30 years ago this was happening.
Yeah.
And here we are today.
Yeah. So Rabin was the nemesis. He considered to be a traitor. And eventually it's led to the assassination of Rabin. He was murdered by a religious university student. And it was a huge shock for everyone. The fact that a Jew will murder a Jew and prime minister of the state of Israel.
Did you feel as a teenager like you had some kind of responsibility for it, even if it was small? You were talking about those demonstrations where you're burning pictures of him and saying like death to Rabin, and then it happens.
As a teenager, I thought that it is a good thing. That even though this is not what we wanted to happen, we didn't want Rabin to be murdered, but if it will stop this disaster of the Oslo Accord and the potential of evacuating settlements, so
it's a means to an end.
Yeah. Only later I realized how horrible it is. Later, as a teenager, not years later, because of the schools that I went to, because of the talk around me. I understand that it was a line that should not be even crossed. My mother cried when the news broke out that Rabin was dead. She was start crying, and I remember I was there watching the news with them, with my parents, and I remember, I don't know if I asked her or only myself, why is she crying? Isn't it what we wanted to happen? And in my childish way of thinking, it was like a good thing, I think.
And during that time, the education system decided to try and kind of reconcile the relationship between religious and secular Jews in Israel and sent you to this program.
There was a great fear in Israel of the danger of breaking apart, right-wing and left-wing, religious and secular. So to prevent this kind of separation between different parts of Israel, they started to become very popular, some kind of program of, as you said, reconciliation, mitigation, and to meet the other side. And the school, the yeshiva where I went to, sent us to a seminar, a bridge, we call it, gesher.
To bridge between you and these secular kids.
Yes. And in the seminar, I met a girl from a secular family from the north of Israel. And she started to shake my perspective on my life and on the region and on the world.
How so?
Well, first of all, it's important to know, to say that the religious Zionist really considers themselves better than other. This supremacy is really part of this ideology.
Like even other Jews?
Yeah, of course. If the other Jews are secular or left-wing, then they don't know. They have no values. They only want to enjoy life and like nihilism kind of way of living. And also this is how I was taught that the reason that the current government is pushing toward the peace agreement is not because they have values. We have values. We have values of Eretz Israel. We have values of the Torah. We have values of our religions. They only want to go to parties and smoke drugs.
They want to be comfortable.
Yeah, and they want a comfortable life. They don't want to go to the army. They are tired. They established the country, but they have no more energy to keep building it. This is really how we looked at the situation. And I really grew up under the assumption that secular people are stupid. Or not, I don't know if stupid, but they
ignorant. They don't know the Torah.
They are ignorant, and they are empty, and they are shallow, and only I can teach them. I have nothing to learn from them. Maybe I can be nice and tell them that I have not something to learn from them, especially if you're going to a Gesher seminar. But the basic assumption was, we know they don't. We have values. They only want to live a comfortable life. And then I start talking to this girl, and I realized that what I've been told was far from reality. I meet a secular girl, very left in her opinion and political view, that knows the Bible, studied Bible in school, that really knows the story and has another perspective on the story. She can explain the stories that I know by heart since I start talking, and she can explain the stories that I know so well from completely different perspective, with a different explanation, with a different context that I have no idea that even exists, that this way of thinking is even exists.
So like not as a history book, but more as literature. As cultural
literature, and as a literature that was written in a specific context, in the specific time, with relation to with other cultures that living at the area at the time, not something that God brought to us as one unit,
like miraculously.
Yeah, this is, the Bible is the word of God. And this is how we study it. Then someone show me, look, here, this holiday, this law is very common in agrarian cultures in the Middle East at the same time. And then, wow, this is so weird to look at things that I know so well from a new angle, and to hear it from someone that my baseline was only I have something to teach her. It's shaking my world.
So you were like very impressed that she actually knows the Bible, but she has something to teach you about it, even though she's secular and leftist.
I was very surprised. And also she started challenging me with moral questions that I have no answer. I was sure at the age of 16, I was sure that I have all the answers. Maybe all 16 years old people think like this, but I had all the political questions that I can win any argument, that I know I can explain why Zionism lost its way, why religious Zionism will continue this way, why we cannot trust the Arabs, why from every reason we should keep the settlement, and keep building more settlement. I have all the answers. And then I ran into questions that I never thought about.
Like what?
Like why gay people should be punished for being gay. Something that I never thought about. I never talked about this subject in school, because they were born like this. So why God can say that to them not to act as they are? Also, a question of why I'm listening to rabbis that tell me everything that I should do. From where is the source of their authority to dictate me every aspect of my life? Also, something that I never thought about. And the third question is, what about our moral obligation toward the Palestinians? How we treat the Palestinians as humans. And it was a complete shock to me, because Palestinians, for me, was a threat, was the enemy. Why should I have any moral obligation toward people that want to kill me? And then I started thinking, what we control. I start realizing we are controlling their life.
But she explained to you that you're controlling their lives?
She opened my mind to look in a different angle on the reality around me, and it sent me to read some books and texts that I didn't knew that existed. Like, Israeli journalists and writers that documented their conversation with Palestinians at the time. People that were willing to look at Palestinians as human and listen to their stories and listen to the life and the difficulties that we put on them, and started to really look at them not as a threat or enemy or part of the landscape, but as people, as human. It's not like that after one conversation I changed my whole perspective, my whole ideology. It was only the first step toward a long journey.
And so even after, the seminar ended, you kept corresponding with her.
Yeah, she became my pen pal.
And at a certain point you stopped.
Yes, I became too threatened from her. I was afraid that the reasons that I don't have answers to her questions is because I don't know enough, because I didn't learn enough. I need to go to another to yeshiva, not just high school yeshiva where you study also mathematics and literature and secular studies, but to yeshiva where you only study Torah.
So you need to deepen your knowledge and understanding of the Jewish texts so that you can have stronger arguments against her. At this point, you're threatened that she might convince you, not because you might be wrong, but because your arguments aren't strong enough.
I don't think that at the time changing my life or convincing me that the other side is the true one was a real threat. I didn't think it will become to that. I just thought that I don't know enough to answer her. That's all. That I just need to learn more.
But there's no way that she's right and you're wrong at that point.
Of course not. After the high school yeshiva, we needed to choose between going straight to the army, going to 1 year of studying before the army, or going to yeshiva.
There's all these programs that basically enable you to study Torah while you're serving the military, or before, during, and after, and then you kind of can integrate it. So there's these different routes that you can choose, and you chose the route where you wanted to study well.
Yes. And I went to yeshiva in Ramat Gan.
That's near Tel Aviv.
Yeah, and I'm coming there full of doubts, full of questions, with expectation to get answers in here. This is the time for me to get answer, to know how I can bring together the ways that I live and the ways that I think, the new perspectives that I encountered during the last few years.
On a religious level or ideological, political level?
It was mixed. It was both, but mainly religious. And most of all, the question of the rabbinical authority, most of all, because, the Orthodox religious law book is surrounding a person's life from all around.
360 degrees.
From the minute you open your eyes to the minute you go back to sleep, for the minute that you were born to the minute that you will die, from all year long, there is a law for every action. Before you drink water, how you tie your shoes, how you sleep, how you manage your relationship with your family and your wife. And so the question of rabbinical authority was very, very important. Why should I follow these rules if God didn't came from God? And eventually I realized, God has nothing to do with it. And when I realized that, I have no reason to stay religious anymore. And also the supremacy of the condescending toward other people, to other nation, to other, it started to becoming a little bit uncomfortable to me. I won't say that I had some strong objection around it, but it started to feel uncomfortable. Something there was not completely right. So even after I left the yeshiva, I kept in touch with the yeshiva head, the rabbi, and the place, because I really enjoyed studying the Torah. I really like this text. I really like the environment. I did like the music, the whole being part of it. Even though I didn't wear kippah, yarmulke outside of the yeshiva, and even though I didn't keep the laws,
By this point,
a few years later, we're talking about the times that I already been serving in the army, and a few years afterward, and I kept coming back to listen to lectures in the yeshiva. And I remember that one time I was in one of these lectures while we studying, something completely unrelated. But when you gave a rabbi a book, he opened the book and started talking about what he wanted to talk about. And that rabbi decided to talk about a specific event that happened at the time. There was a huge earthquake in Iran at the time. And a lot of Iranian was killed. I think, tens of thousands of people. It was a huge disaster that was not related at all to the political situation. But this rabbi expressed this joy of other people dying because they are goyim, because they are the enemies, because they are Gentiles, because they are not us. And I remember that it was very hard for me to listen to that at the time. And it's not uncommon, this kind of expression toward people that are not Jews in this establishment and this ideology. I started to see it. Before that, I was blind to it. I was part of it. But as I grew apart more and more from the ideology and the culture that I was born into, I started to notice it more and more.
Mm-hmm. And your military service?
Military service is the most important phase in life for a young man in this community. And it was expected of me to be in the most combat unit, to be a commander, to be an officer, to express my ideology through the army service. But I was a complete failure because I'm not really a warrior. It's not in my character. So I did serve as a combat soldier in a tank unit, an armory unit. Many of my friends was serving in special units, in all this kind of commando, have their own, war stories.
But during your military service, there were a few incidents that you felt created distrust between you and the military establishment.
When I was in the army, I was supposed to go and serve in Lebanon, but then the government decided to withdraw from Lebanon. So I went in just to get out. And then we reassembled on the new borderline in 2001. It was still no fence, no military bases. We needed to build the border, actually. But before that, we needed to guard the border. So our unit needed to, every night, our tank will go to a viewpoint where we can use the night vision system of the tank in order to scan the area and to make sure that nobody crossed the border. And in this kind of activity, there is a specific drill in case of a missiles being shot to the tank, toward us. And part of the drill is, as the gunner, I need to shoot to the direction where the missiles is being shot to us. But if I don't see where the missile has been shot to us, I need to shoot to a specific point agreed upon in advance with the commander. So we went into position, and the commander is looking around, and he said to me, Aharon, you look at this place. Here you need to shoot in case of a missile drill. And I look at it and I said, yes, but it is a house. There is light in it. It is very close to the village of the Lebanese village. People are living there. If we don't sure that they've been shot, they are shooting at us, why should I shoot toward this house? And the commander really didn't like my answer. He blamed me in disobeying order, a military order. And we start arguing. I say to him, well, it's only hypothetical. It's not yet the order. If someone will shoot at us, I will shoot back. But yet he didn't get it. And we start arguing for a few nights, every night, shouting at each other at the tank. I don't know why I insist on it at the time, because for everyone else around me, it was the most common thing to do. Another story is, after the withdrawal from Lebanon, we gathered the platoon together again after being everyone in different location. One of the tank's team members entered to the bus, picked us up, and the gunner shout, "Call me a murderer! I am a murderer because we destroy these terrorists. They came to shoot at us." This tank unit was standing also in a viewpoint position, and they noticed a few hundred meters from them a car stop, people going outside, taking some stand and putting something on the stand and aiming it toward the tank. They were sure it was someone want to shoot at them. So they shoot at them right ahead and they killed 2 men. Later on, it was discovered that it was not a Hezbollah terrorist. It was a BBC journalist.
Oh, wow.
And the commander of this tank, when we went back to our unit, to the home base, he took a can of red paint and went to the tank and draw very beautiful symmetric X's on the gun of the tank.
Which symbolize like how many terrorists I've killed.
Yeah.
Wow.
This was the sentiment. I know the sentiment of a soldier in a combat. Also, this is why I said I don't have the character of a warrior.
You also had incidents where you avoided crimes that maybe you could have committed.
Literally by accident.
Mm-hmm.
You know, tanks are made of very heavy parts, and those parts are moving very fast. So it is a very dangerous tool to be in, because if your arms or legs are in the wrong place in the wrong time, you will lose an arm or a leg. And as a gunner, I was inside the tank and I was responsible to the movement of part of the tank, those parts that should move very fast. And I was sitting in the tank night after night, all night long. You need to be very vigilant to keep my eyes open for every movement in the territory, in the field that I should scan. And night after night after night, at some point I didn't notice that my left hand was in the wrong place to be. And then I made the gun move and my right hand crushed between the gun and another part of the tank. And I broke 3 fingers in my left hand. So they sent me home to heal. And while I was at home, Hezbollah attacked an IDF patrol and kidnapped 3 soldiers. So I just went back to the base, even though I had nothing to contribute, only because I wanted to be part of this action. And then when the gunner that replaced me went back, he told me that he got an order to shoot every vehicle that was in the area.
You mean every vehicle in sight on the Lebanese side?
In the Lebanese
driving
side.
Across.
Yes. They got an order on this road. Every car that moves, you shoot at it. You have no idea if they are civilian. You have no idea if our hostages are in the car. You have no idea if it is Hezbollah. Just shoot. And he did it. I have no idea how many people he killed. Maybe he just killed the terrorist. I don't know. Maybe he killed an innocent family. I don't know. But I do know that without this accident, I was there instead of him. Blood of other people would have been on my hand. This is something that I'm really grateful for. I really believed at the time in the importance of serving the army, of being part of this effort. It took me a lot of years to realize that I was on the wrong side at the time as well.
And when you finished your military service, you went to study in Tel Aviv?
Yeah, and I chose to study biblical study in the university and also Hebrew linguistics. I went to study biblical because I was still curious about studying the ancient text for a secular perspective.
Just like that girl that you met.
Yes. Eventually, I graduated with a BA in linguistics, and I started to work as an editor in the financial newspaper, writing and working on economical issues mainly. But working with journalists opened me to a new channels of information that I didn't know before. We are talking about 2008, 2009. Not yet social media is present, but the internet is popular already. And a lot of journalists also had their own blogs. One of them, his name is Yossi Govitz. May rest in peace. He died last year. For a living, he was writing about technology and economic. And he was a writer that worked with me. While I was an editor, he was a writer. But he also has a very political blog at the time, Friend of George, on the name of George Orwell. And from this blog, I got to know other blogs, like the blog of Idan Landau.
Who was also interviewed in this podcast.
And I started to receive information about what the real meaning of the occupation, how the Zionist narrative was started to reassemble in front of my eyes. I started to understand that the real reasons that we hold these territories and that we treat Palestinians this way is not really for security. It's not really for protecting our life. And the real reason that the Oslo agreement failed, it's not because Arabs are not willing to accept our present. It is much more complicated. And the real reason that the settlement are being built is not to protect from terror attacks. It's to get control on the land.
And also when you zoom into what the lives of Palestinians look like, you see how the policy is so discriminatory. You see how it's very well planned and how it's not a bug, it's a feature.
And I start to understand how brutal and vicious and cruel is the policy toward the Palestinian, and how unjustified it is in many cases, most of the cases. I started to get a better picture about the situation in the West Bank. And my opinion started to shift more and more toward the left because of this information, because I have some kind of willing that I still don't know how is it that other people are not, it's nothing is penetrating their current political view, no fact, no story, nothing. And for me, there was no coping mechanism to push away this information. It was absorbed.
At this point, how did you feel about going to visit your parents in the house that you grew up in?
It became more and more difficult emotionally because I was not practicing Judaism anymore. I didn't care about Shabbat, but in my parent family, I should respect Shabbat.
This means that you need to get there before the sundown on Friday, and you can only leave after sundown on Saturday.
And during all this time, you should not
use electricity,
talk on the phone, listen to music. You should have to be part of the prayers and all of the ceremonies, and just the road from Jerusalem to Hebron to Kiryat Arba. I cannot ignore anymore what I saw. At the time, we went through the Palestinian villages, the refugee camp, the Haisha refugee camp, El Arub, the refugee camp, Khalkhul, Hebron. So I saw the Palestinian around me. I saw people getting arrested by the army. I saw the army vehicles going inside the civilian population. And I realized more and more how it shouldn't be like this, how unnormal it is, how brutal it is. how people are suffering from being controlled by armed units of people that didn't consider them as worthy of human treatment. So
it's pretty amazing how you can see the same things physically during two different periods of your life. And when you were younger, you just didn't see this. You didn't see it. And then now you see it, and it kind of like exposes so much. And this is a little different than people who didn't grow up in the West Bank as settlers. When I was growing up, the West Bank was like the other side of the wall. You didn't know what was going on there. It was like this void, and everything there is violent and bad, and it's far away, and you don't really know what's going on there because you're not there until you really choose to take that step and go and see it for yourself. But when you were growing up, you were seeing this for yourself, but you weren't seeing it.
Yeah, I've seen it, but I haven't noticed it. I have great mechanism to screen everything that did not align with the narrative and the ideology that I was educated to believe in.
And this is what you see is happening with the rest of the people that you grew up with and the people who are growing up as settlers now in the West Bank.
And the harsh response every time you try to confront or to make them notice what they are. I believe that they are putting a lot of mental energy and resources in order for them not to see what they don't want to see, not to notice what is happening around them. So when someone is trying to make them notice, they respond in aggressive way because all of this energy should not be wasted. So at the time, I thought that if I only talk to people, they will see it immediately, and I realized that it's not working like this. At some point, I decided not to talk politics with my family at all because there is no common ground.
And then the 2011 protests began, and you were like very involved in that.
Yeah, I found myself very active in another political aspect of the Israeli situation. You know, the 2011 protest movement, first it was part of a worldwide movement.
Part of like the Occupy Wall Street.
The Occupy Wall Street in the United States, but was also very huge movement in Spain and other parts of Europe, but most of all the Arab Spring. And I think it was very confused movement.
Here.
Yeah. Also in the United States, but let's talk about here. We didn't know what we are protesting against. We didn't know what we are expecting to happen. We demand a social justice. It has no meaning if you don't put meaning into that. It can go all direction to every ideology can use this phrase. The people are demanding social justice.
I think that a lot of people during these protests saw the symptoms that they weren't happy with, like poverty and like discrimination against certain populations, not Palestinians, usually populations within the Jewish society. And they said, we don't like these symptoms. They're bad. We want to eliminate them. But they didn't really understand how deep they needed to go to realize the connection between all of those things.
Yeah, it was some kind of a feeling or a sentiment of getting to know that something is wrong, but we don't know exactly what is wrong.
Yeah.
It was 2 years after Netanyahu came back to power, and he was starting to really establish his
like neoliberal policies,
and most of it his authoritarian aspiration. He started to choke the democracy for Jews, but what we did have at the time, and we felt that something wrong and something bad is about to happen, but we didn't know exactly to point a finger towards this psychopath person and the people that are surrounding him, and to the ideology that brings so much violence and cruelty to our society. We have some feeling, but we didn't know exactly what need to be changed. So it was a very, very strong sentiment. It was talking about 500,000 Israelis protesting at the same time, it was unprecedented. It was not happened since then.
Mm-hmm.
But the main call was, let's not talk about Palestinian right now. We need to solve our interior problems, and then we can look outside. Don't make it too much complicated. We need to solve this economical situation. We need to solve the housing crisis. We need to solve how we manage our public budget. Don't talk to us right now about Palestinians, about peace process. We solve things inside, and then we can talk about what's happening outside. That was something that, I was part of it as well. I realized that something wrong is happening in the occupied territories, but I thought maybe tactically we should leave it right now, and later on we will solve it somehow.
You were also discovering cryptocurrencies and how centralized economies need to be dismantled. So you thought that was like the focus.
Yeah, at the time I was exposed to a lot of radical and innovative ideas that came, through the internet. Some of them was conspiracy theories, right? That became even more common during the years. But I started to learn about the failure of the economical structure. I started realizing the structure of banks and government and central banks and debt-based economy and all of that. And also started to look and be part of building alternatives. So cryptocurrency came a little bit later. First, we tried to establish a local community currency of our own, and we started to create a cooperative. I believed in cooperative as a very good model for combining business and community without relying on government. I believe this model can bring social justice and not just keep it as a slogan. So I joined a cooperative that tried to build a wind turbine to promote renewable energy. This cooperative died very quickly because the regulator demanded them to provide all the paperwork needed for a publicly traded companies. It cost hundreds of thousands of shekels. They have no chance to recruit. And also, I bought a share in a cooperative that tried to create a new bank to bring some competition to the bank system. But most of all, I found myself in a cooperative pub, a restaurant, and a community center. We gathered about 400 members, almost all of them from the social protest movement. This is where we met. This is where they heard about the idea. We rent a building in the south of Tel Aviv, and we established our place. It was a vegan restaurant, one of the first vegan restaurants in Tel Aviv at the time. It was a hostel, and it was a community center. And also there was the roof, the green roof. This is why my own corner in the building. I was doing compost from the kitchen scrap of the restaurant, and I was growing vegetables, trying to grow some vegetables from time to time, also bringing them back to the kitchen. Like, it was a great pride of me to closing a circle, the food circle in one building in the city. But most of all, I was managing the finance and the management of a restaurant that was not really successful from the business aspect, to say the least. We lost a lot of money. We have no idea what we are doing.
But it did attract a lot of different activists from different struggles.
Yes, it was a center for a lot of kind of activism. First, it was the vegan activism that was very, very popular at the time in Israel, became more and more popular. A lot of lectures about veganism and all of that. It was also a center for some new radical economical ideas like Bitcoin, like Ethereum. It was the first business in Israel that was accepting Bitcoin as a payment in 2013. So the Bitcoin community, the blockchain communities started to emerge at the time, also find a place where they can meet to drink beer and pay in Bitcoin for, right now it can be one beer could be worth, I don't know, a few apartments in the price if you consider it. But this is where I've been exposed to the ideas of blockchain and the potential of this technology as well. And also, it was not the main activity there, but also some human rights activism found place and home.
And you also hosted an event of breaking the silence there.
Yeah, but then the response was, it was different than other groups that came to talk. First, I started to get threatening calls and text messages from people that really tried to prevent this event to happen. And I made it very clear to everyone that tried to prevent it, that it will happen no matter what. And then the police started to harass us. Day before the event, a high commander of the Israeli police in Tel Aviv came to check that we are obeying all the regulations that are needed from a restaurant in Tel Aviv. So something that really usually some kind of a clerk of some very low rank inspector come to check that everything is in the right place and the fire extinguisher are intact. Then we found ourselves in the deputy chief of the Tel Aviv area unit come to check it. It was very strange. But eventually they didn't find any excuse to prevent the event to happen. So a group of breaking the silence came to tell their story of their serving in the army, of what they have done to the Palestinians, how they become disillusioned of this narrative, and how they want to prevent from others to do the same things. But while the lecture was happening inside, I was outside because I needed to handle a situation where right-wing protesters, not many, I think was 15, maybe 20 people, standing in front of the restaurant with Israeli flags and shouting and cursing very aggressively. And people from the restaurant, some of them went outside to confront them. And then one of workers of the restaurant came a little bit too close to the protesters, and one of them tried to push him away using the stick of a flag, and the guy held the flag, and then it fell down, and then everybody starts screaming, "Israeli flag on the ground! What an abomination! How could it be?" And then everything exploded until the police came to separate between the fighter. And then we noticed that our guy that get hit by the protester is getting arrested, while the ones that did the beating are getting hugged by the police and just trying to calm them down. We hear, and then I realized, well, the police is not here to protect me, and it was another crack in my relation with the Israeli establishment, you can say. This was things that helps taking apart my intuitive or formal relation to the Israeli establishment that I felt part of, that I think that even if I had some criticism, it was mine, it was me. And then it started and became more and more. From then on, I had more experience of being on the other side than the armed forces of the army or the police.
This is like exactly the 180 degrees opposite of the relations that you used to have with the soldiers right outside your house guarding the fence.
Yeah. You know, my mother still, every Shabbat, she's making a dish, taking all this, bring food from Shabbat table of our family and bring it to the soldier in the post that is very near my parents' house. Every meal, every Shabbat, she brings them a cup of coffee and a cake in the morning. She brings them a bowl of soup and the chalot and the bread and the wine and everything every Shabbat, because they are the soldiers. They are protecting us, and we love them because of that. No matter who, from where they are, and the relationship with the soldier are very close. You know, it's something like. I don't see it as something bad. I really appreciate my mother to do that, because being so kind to other people, to strangers, and being grateful for them being there. But for me, I cannot be in this naive place anymore. I know that they are here to protect me, but in the cost of other people's freedom, of other people's freedom of movement, of other people's right to be here.
And you also experienced a very bizarre experience while you were protesting against the war on Gaza in 2014.
Yeah, in 2014, there was another round of violence in Gaza. At the time, I already know that it is wrong, that it is not really about security, it's more about revenge. And I joined a protest, a small group of protesters that demanding the end of the war. And again, right-wing protesters came to confront us. There was police separating, and I found myself at the edge of the left protester. And then I did one step too much toward the right wing, and I found myself surrounded by right-wing protesters shouting at me. But as they were shouting at me, I received a text message that my little brother was recruited and he's entering into Gaza right now. It was scary. It was intensive. I was not harmed at the time, but I realized how dangerous it is to demand a stop to the violence in Israel, because then the violence will aim toward you.
And it's very surreal to receive such a text message while this is all happening.
It is all surreal, yeah.
So later on, you started volunteering in protective presence in the West Bank.
I joined a few times for this kind of activity. It started from a Facebook post that friends put a video of them getting beaten by settlers while they were trying to help Palestinian shepherds in Jordan Valley. And I called this friend, and he invited me to join them next week. And then I found myself, taking part in this activity that most of the time is the most calm and nice thing, to be in the nature with the sheep. Everything is quiet until it's not. But most of all, I met the people themselves, not just ideas. So I started to join from time to time to protective presence with shepherds. I started to join olive harvesting at the season. Picking the harvest is a very special, even enjoyable experience. You know, some of the Palestinians are here for generations. They are living here, they are practicing this traditional agriculture methods. They are living with the olives. And for them as well, it's an event. It makes a very special connection between me as a person that still wants to live here. Don't know if it will happen, but I still see this land and this Israel-Palestine as my homeland. And to learn from the people that live here for generations how to take an active part in this kind of tradition is very special. I really appreciated that I had the chance to do that. A year later, when we came to help him harvest the olives, the trees, when we reached the land, that before that it was very close to the settlement, to the outpost, now we noticed that about, dozen trees were cut off, and someone just tear down the whole area and build a new house on the place where the olives were there. And the other trees that were still there, someone already picked up the fruits, the olives.
Stole the harvest, basically.
Actually stole them, yeah. And we came back empty-handed very much sooner than we planned to.
Yeah, this is becoming more and more common. Not only like obstructing the harvest for the Palestinians, but also stealing the harvest after they're chased off the land.
And I remember the sorrow of the Palestinian farmer. I remember it was devastating to see it, but also to realize that it is so common. It's a routine. This is the daily life. And to see another incident like this, and another one, and to hear it from this friend, and to read it here and there, and we are drowning in cruelty. And most of Israelis have no idea, and some of them, when they hear about it, they shield themselves to have any compassion toward those people.
I think also when you take part with Palestinian farmers, you are exposed more to not only to their connection to the land, but also to how the establishment destroys the land and how it's not only a war against the Palestinian people, but also against the land.
Yeah, and this is where I found the potential for a deep impact in this struggle. Because if we can find a way to combine the sustainability movement, the environmental movement, with the human rights movement, specifically here, while realizing that the way that we treat the people is wrong, not less than the way that we treat the land and the environment.
Yeah. And when we just want to build more and more and more and pave more roads and destroy traditional ways of living with the land in harmonious ways, we're destroying the land.
You know, there was a line in an Israeli song. I don't remember right now the name of the song, but the line was, it's like a song that was written to the land of Israel. And in the song, we promised to cover the land with a dress of concrete.
Yeah.
So yes, this was the Zionist project's main goal. It is a modern project in this aspect, that it meant to control the land and not only to live on it and to be with relation with the land and the environment. And I really believe that we have so much to learn from the Palestinian population. It's not like all the Palestinians are green, let's say. I'm well aware that Palestinians living in cities as well, and they are taking part in pollution not less than other. But
that's also, in many cases, the outcome of dispossessing them from their land and forced urbanization, forcing them to live in conditions in which they lose their connection with the land in the first place.
Yeah, could be, but what I'm talking about is that living with the land in a sustainable way is part of their culture.
Yeah,
it's part of their ethos. They're learning from previous generations how we should cultivate the olive trees and the vegetable garden. When the first Zionists came to Israel and looked at the Palestinians that lived like this, they looked on them from above, like, how poor are you? You have no will to advance. What about innovation? What about progress? What about technology? Why are you using this donkey when you can bring this tractor? Why are you using primitive ways of harvesting or of agriculture while you have modern technologies that you can be much more efficient and much more productive? Why aren't you use chemical fertilizer? This was part of the Zionist supremacy approach to the Palestinian because they are not advanced. But right now, when we start realizing, we as a culture, the damage that this technology and this modernity bring to us, and while we are approaching into also a crisis that may risk life on Earth, and we realize that we have the answer. We just need to learn them from people that we are right now choking, that right now we are abusing.
Yeah, and they've been trying to say this all along. Palestinians have been trying to convey this exact message for decades. They've been trying to say, don't dispossess us from our lands because we know how to cultivate them, live in harmony with the land. And till today, it's the same message and we still haven't gotten it. And like, you're saying something that's like filled with a lot of truth, I feel. And it should be so obvious. To Palestinians, I think it's very obvious. I think every Palestinian that's listening right now is like, duh, Captain Obvious. But I think that many people who are listening who don't maybe know the Palestinian population that well or the Palestinian culture that well, or maybe Israelis that are listening might be able to see that this angle has been there all along. It's not new.
I really believe that Israel-Palestine, these areas, we have a message to the world. I don't know if we will be able to say it, if we will be able to understand it, if we will be able to express it, if the world will be willing to hear it. But if we're looking at the wider context, and if we understand, if we are listening just to hear the people, to see them and to listen to them and to respect them and to get rid of this European supremacy, that on top of it we bring the chosen people narrative of Judaism, that bring another layer of supremacy, and we are not above them. We are not better than them, even though they use ancient ways of working, even though they don't have the same technologies that we have. Is it this technology really make us happier or better, and will it really sustain us? So this is a lesson that we can learn together, Israelis and Palestinians, and teach the world. But we cannot begin to learn it before we treat people around us as human.
So after having been through this very long process and understanding all these things, how is your relationship today with your family, with your childhood friends, the place that you grew up in?
I didn't kept in touch with almost anyone of my childhood friends. There is one, maybe two that I still, Facebook friends, I see them from time to time online, but not much more than that. My family, I was blessed with a really loving and caring family. My parents and my brother and sisters, they know they do not understand me, but they still love me and accept me. And right now, there is a lot of affection, and we are in a good relation. From time to time, the political issues are arising, and it brings some tension, mainly during the last few months, But there is a good base, a good ground for handling this tension. If you go one step further toward my cousins and my uncles and aunts, I almost have no relation with them. During the year, it became less and less common for me to communicate with them, and some of them became so extreme. Some of them are living in the outpost, some of them living in the old settlement, but became more and more violent and more racist and more aggressive and more cruel during the years that I cannot ignore that anymore. I cannot meet them in family occasion and just being like everything is okay, everything is normal. The 7th of October, the attack of Hamas, the massacre, this horrifying thing that happened, it pushed so many Israelis into extremes. Even people that were not full of hate toward Palestinian before, that became unbearable to talk to. And a few days after the attack, I got a WhatsApp message from a relative of mine. This relative, her daughter, lives in one of the new outposts in the South Hebron Hills. And they were sure that after the Hamas attack in Gaza, the Palestinians are going to butcher all of us. And of this fear, she wrote me, "You should know that the guys on the hills are in the highest alert conditions that can be. If anarchists will get near them, they will shoot them. Tell this to your friends."
When she says anarchist, she means like leftist activists doing protective presence.
Yeah, they are talking of every human rights activist is anarchist for them, even though they are the ones that breaking the law and doesn't care about the law anymore. She actually threatened to shoot me and my friend. And to get this kind of a message from a relative, a person that I liked before. I was fond of her as a child, and over the years, I never talked politics with her, as far as I remember. This message was not part of a conversation. No, it came out of nowhere. And someone so related to me find it possible to shoot at my friends and me just for being in some near their houses, I realized that I cannot keep acting like it is normal. And this part of my family, I decided to detach completely. Afterward, my mother convinced her to apologize. My brother is being engaged lately and is about to get married in a few weeks. And I told them that I don't know how I will be in this event. I don't know how I can be in the same room with people that threaten to shoot at me and my friends. And my mother talked to her and convinced her to apologize. And I read the apology and responded to it, and then was no response. And I realized it's just to make my mother happy. They didn't really, I don't think that they really meant it. So I will be in the wedding, but I'm not going to communicate with them whatsoever. I'm not going to sit at the same table with them. I'm not going to exchange one word with them. They are my family, but they are strangers as far as I'm concerned. I really appreciate the fact that my parents and my sisters and brother appreciate me as a person. And I know that no matter what, they will love me and I will love them back. But one step forward in my family, I cannot find myself.
Like the extended family, you mean?
The extended family. I cannot find myself related to them anymore. They become our gap, our moral gap is so wide that I don't see how we can bridge it anytime.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all that. I appreciate it. Do you have anything to add before we wrap it up?
Thank you for the opportunity to tell my story. I'm sitting here with a desperation of the current situation. Right now, I don't see a way out of the violent circle and the hatred that is washing this country. The current political situation in Israel, between Jews mainly, is based on denial about how deep are the differences, the ideology and the vision, how different groups have such different vision for this place. But there is still some common knowledge of a unity, of that the Jewish people are one unit, one people or one nation. And I believe that until we overcome this way of thinking and we will be willing to confront the insane ideas that take control over some groups in the Israeli society, we won't be able to solve anything. And there is a great fear of a civil war. And I think it's justified. And for me, it's even more frightening. In Hebrew, we call the civil war a brother war, מלחמת אחים. And I look at my family and I look at the settlers and I look at the religious Zionism and I see how well armed are they and how much passion they have and how they really, really believe that we are on the road to Messiah will come and rebuild the temple and for salvation that's been promised by the prophets and by God. I am afraid that everyone that will stand in their way, they will practice violence against them.
And that includes you.
And includes me personally, and it includes every Israeli person that is willing to protect Palestinians and or even treat Palestinians as human. And I'm really, really scared of violence outbreak inside of Israel. And I fear that there will come a point in time, not so far from now, that every Israeli will have to choose on which side they are. And the ideology of Jewish supremacy and the Messianic ideology is willing to act violently and they are well armed, and the other side is denying it, is denying that it will get there. And yes, I have no optimistic saying right now to end this conversation. I myself starting to plan living in other place in order to avoid this situation. I hope it won't come to it, but I'm afraid that this is what is coming. I really hope that I will find it. I find myself wrong about this as well, but
somehow you still take part in things that are meant to create change in small steps.
Yeah, I still do some small things. I still volunteer in driving Palestinian patient to the hospital from the checkpoint and back from time to time. A week ago, I was helping a Palestinian farmer it was also part of a Buddhistic group of Dharma practitioner. I think we didn't talk about it, but I think this is also something that guides me. The idea of karma, the idea that every small action has consequences, for good or for bad. So even though I don't see how it can impact and change the political landscape, and how it can prevent the horrible things that are happening right now in Gaza, and how it can eliminate the violence and the hatred and the cruelty, it's so small. It's like a drop in the ocean, but this is what I can do. So I will keep doing it until I want.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you Roy Geva for the beautiful music. And thank you for all the supporters on Patreon. You guys are amazing. Really, really helping taking this podcast forward and bringing these stories to more and more people. If you want to support the podcast, go to the link in the show notes. You can support the Patreon of the podcast there. I would really, really appreciate it. And there's exclusive content there. So thank you.